Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to this work session for April 4th, 2022. As I will always say at the start of these work sessions, these are very informal chances for council to dialogue. I know it's a little bit disconcerting to have everybody up at the dais, but this is really just a first person or first name chatty discussion, hopefully, of topics that come before the work session. So there will not be an opportunity for public comment tonight because no final decisions will be made tonight, but all we're looking to do is build consensus on a topic. And tonight's topic is council work or committee structures for the standing committees. This was brought up as a topic in our council goal settings back in not this past December, but the December before. So this clears out the last topic that we had to discuss from the current fiscal year's goal setting session. So with that, we have some information in our council packet. We're not planning to show that tonight or have a formal presentation. This was brought up previously. And this is back in, just looking at the date here, for what's in our packet. It was end of 2020. So we're looking at, August 17th, 2020 was when this came up before. And just want to give the council a chance to discuss where we're at today and what, if any changes they would like to see to the work sessions. And so the last thing I'll say on this before opening it up for discussion is I see three different things that could happen out of this meeting tonight. One is just to keep things exactly as they are. Second would be to maybe make some modifications that would be probably experimental, just try some things for the rest of the year. Or the third would be, to lock in what we have in our processes and change the ordinances to reflect that. Because right now, we say we're going to do one thing in the ordinances with the standing committees, but we actually carry it out a different way because of a change in admin policy number 7. So if we're just tidying up and the fact that we've had this in place for a while, this might be a good time to just nail that down and have that as a permanent change. So for those who are interested in having this work session, would you like to just open this up and talk about what sorts of things you're looking for?
Well, can I start with a question?
Yes, please
We
do.
got an email, or I got one today, that talked about the work sessions and public input.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if you could first start with that by explaining, before we used to just have work sessions really for goal setting,
Right.
Maybe for CIP. Is there something actually in our ordinances that there cannot be public input for work sessions? Because they were alleging that they're not legal.
Right. Well, I'll turn it over for Kevin for details if needed. But under the open meetings law, we're required to have all public meetings available and accessible to the public, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily participate. It's really up to us. We've decided as a council and as a mayor over custom that we want to have input in. And there have been some informal boundaries around that, like typically not in a work setting or work session. And with committee of the whole, I've granted public comment time if there's something where we're taking an actual motion. But if there's just an informational presentation, typically we've not done that, as I understand it, just because when it then comes before the regular council meeting, the public will have a chance then to comment on it before a final vote. So it's not written down, and maybe that's something that would be worth considering is having those listed out, maybe in admin policy 7 to clarify that.
But there's no state codes as to whether public input is required or not, or?
No.
No.
State code does not require public comment during council meetings. Generally, they are provided for in one form or another, but certainly a work session, there's no legal requirement that there be public input.
Okay, so it's really the same as on the regular agenda where we put the public comment. We don't have to do that. We choose to do it.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's pretty common for most city councils, I understand, is have some opportunity for the public to weigh in.
There's a little more to it. I'll just add a nuance, and that is that there needs to be some way for residents to voice concerns at council. Public hearings, for instance, are legally required to have public input, but otherwise to allow some sort of vehicle for public participation. Generally, in a regular council meeting, city councils will have some sort of format for public to speak on general issues that aren't necessarily on the agenda. But for all other matters, there's no real requirement for that.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that a little bit. I think I would be inclined to want to have public comment on work sessions because that gives guidance to the council, flavor of the arguments, that sort of thing, to see how we'd want to move forward. Instead of having the council not have public comment during a work session, then we make a decision or have a consensus, and then we have public comment later that could have swayed the work that might have been done, whether it's this topic or any topic.
Okay. And I will want to be careful too. The topic tonight is the standing committees, which is going to be its own significant topic to cover. I think it would make sense if we want to talk work sessions to add that on as a meeting, because it's got its own particular nuances, like where we hold it and what. Yeah. So certainly, I don't want to miss that.
So you mean you're saying we want a work session on whether we allow the public to speak at a work session?
Well, just as part of it. I mean, you can be funny about it, but it's the idea of what we want work sessions to accomplish. And to Susan's point, we rarely had them in the past.
Well, yeah, that was the beauty of the committees, was items were worked out in committee, not in work sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Work sessions were a very rare thing for large items that we wanted televised because of, whether it be the budget, CIP, that kind of thing. Goal setting was something totally separate. But with the committee meetings, they were a more intimate setting. They were in the mayor's conference room.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was question about transparency and wanting to televise them. So we went through a process where we tried to do some tables out in front of the dais, but that was not good for cable TV, and there was cables everywhere. And then they went to having everyone in the format we're in now. Mm-hmm. But it does make it more difficult for dialogue and with the public if we're going to have a lot of these meetings that used to be committee now in work session.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really important observation, that you're the only one here who was under the original, older style. So you saw a lot more than for us is really hypothetical. For you saw it in action. So did you say that the tables were in front of the dais and then the council members sat at those?
Yeah, and that did not work. Mm-hmm. When they tried to move it out in the mayor's conference room, they tried doing a couple tables out front so we could sit closer together and across from one another. Mm-hmm. But it really did not work well. So then they went to this kind of a seating arrangement. But now we have kind of gone beyond that, and we're doing everything in these work sessions instead of the committees. So we're not really hearing from the public or getting the public input. Mm-hmm. So that was one of my thoughts on going back to committees, was it gives three council members an opportunity to be the chair, to lead the meetings. It also would then pull the public back into the discussion.
Mm-hmm. So is that something we would want to discuss to start with? Is having the committees re-enabled?
Right, they're already in the ordinance. We have three committees. The question is whether you'd want 5 members on each. We used to have 5 members on 2 committees, and then it switched to all 7 of us on the committees. Mm-hmm. The question would be whether you want 5 or 7, and then if you just want the 3 committees like what's in the ordinance, so you really don't have to change any ordinance, and then the mayor would appoint who the chairs are. Like Kelly's currently the administration chair, so I would assume she would be the chair to that committee, which would mean any issue coming forward for that committee, she would run the meeting.
So if in your ideal world on this, what do you think would work best from your experience? So mentioned 3.
Well, that's what I never was here when they had 5, or I think at one time they might have had 3
7.
people, 7 committees. I never dealt with that. The most I ever had was 3. And they worked pretty well. We had well, you know what they are, public relations, administration, and community relations, or public works, I should say. Yeah. I know from staff's perspective, it would be more beneficial if they had 7 members instead of 5. Mm-hmm. It was whether, from the public's perception, whether if you have everyone on there, does it give the impression that a decision is made in a committee meeting rather than in an actual council meeting?
When you say 7 members,
That means
are
all 7
we
of
the
us.
7?
Yeah,
Okay.
the council members. Our mayor, John Cruz, or whether that be Jim Brown, actually, I guess it goes back to John Cruz's day. They would attend the meetings, but they were free to speak or not speak.
But then it was up to those 3 committee members to decide if, like, whether to recommend something forward, or,
Well,
my
that was-
understanding is they actually approved budgets back in the olden days. Then-
Well, the referrals were done just as they are now, where they refer them to committee.
Mhm.
It's just that the committee, instead of being run as committee of the whole and the mayor running it, it's run by the chair.
Okay. Chime in.
I am not for going back to the previous structure. I have concerns about inefficiencies. Eventually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have it in the committee that's proposed, eventually it has to go back to council anyway, right?
Just as it now does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So I feel like there was a slide in here about the inefficiencies of taking up staff's time and council time, the people that serve on the council. So I have a concern about inefficiency. I have a concern that folks don't know their lane enough to sit with city staff in a meeting, and certain folks, a lot of us need to review our roles as council members. So sitting in a meeting with staff and possibly directing staff when that is not that's not the role of us as individuals. It's council that directs changes to staff. So I have a concern about that. I have a concern about the conflicting direction. So like the chain of command. Too many bosses, again, not seen in their lane. That's a major concern for me, is folks overstepping their bounds as a council person, individual, when we know the power of the council is altogether. I have a concern about one person in the council, or 3 or 5, however you're going to do it, becoming experts and then pushing their agenda forward without. I feel like in this current setting, we all have the opportunity to become experts. Maybe not experts, but better informed. I have a concern that that communication may break down, and certain agendas might get pushed forward. I have a concern about the lack of transparency. I think that was a problem in the past. You have less than a quorum. Was it required that it had to be recorded, or how was that handled in the past? I know it wasn't televised at first, but did minutes have to be taken, and how was that reported?
Minutes were taken.
Okay. So, although I'm not for going back to what it was, I can see the benefit of, and I say this as a fairly new council person, educating, an opportunity to educate us and for us to learn, if that was possible, not necessarily in a taking away committee of the whole, but for us to be able to be in to learn and make sure to not give direction, but to learn about each individual department. I think that'd be great, because I think we all could benefit, and our city would benefit if there was an opportunity to tap into the knowledge of staff. But any chance of folks pushing an agenda that might not necessarily be the agenda of the whole council, I have a fear of that. And I also just, the inefficiency of it, I don't want to take more staff time. And frankly, I want to be careful about our own time. I mean, I want this to be an efficient body that when folks think about possibly serving, time is not wasted. So those are my concerns.
Yeah, and to your point about the role of the council in this. A committee is not allowed to provide final direction to staff, no matter the number, like even in committee of the whole, that then has to go to an actual council meeting. So
Yeah,
had some
I know, but
conversations- Yeah, I've had some conversations too about how things had happened in the past, and sometimes that being a challenge.
yeah, I mean, I think about I know that that's the way it's supposed to go, but I don't know that I trust that's the way it would go.
Yeah,
And
it's not just about
don't
structure,
want
it's about personalities too.
And I don't want our staff to be in a position where it's awkward, and it's just a concern. I want efficiency. In my mind, it's important to have efficiency and absolute fairness. And I have a concern if we went back to the old way, that might not happen.
Okay.
Are you talking about if you went to 5 people, or are you just talking about not 7? But if you went to a 5-person committee? I'm assuming, because trying to understand what your point is, because the only thing that goes to the committee is what's referred from the council as a whole through our regular meetings. So I'm not sure how anything, special agendas would happen. When you
Well,
say that they could drive their own special agenda, I'm not sure how that would happen.
just if there's certain folks, the political, like how the mayor appoints people, and right? I mean, there's some politicizing, I feel like, that could happen of, okay, so would it be 3 or 5? Like, what are we trying to get here? 3 or 5 people? How could there be 5 people?
That's what it used to be, was 5.
Right, okay, so then how is that not a quorum? That's a quorum then?
It is.
Okay.
But the problem they ran into was that you could get a 3-2 vote, and then
Right.
it could still fail 4-3 in council.
So it's not
So it could
efficient.
It could be inefficient theoretically.
Yes.
That's why they wanted 7 members. But so I'm going to jump in real quick. I think that committees could be beneficial if done efficiently. I don't have the answer, by the way. I don't know what or have a proposal. But my thought would be, if we're going to go to committees, that we'd have to figure out some way. It would be beneficial from the point where people could lead meetings. The chairs. Everybody could get more experience running the meetings. You could have a different chair. We could have different topics. We could build, hopefully, a stronger relationship with staff and understanding of how each department works. Maybe be a little more specific. I see benefits there. My concern is just how would it work. And then furthermore, how is it different than committee of the whole, or calling it committee of the whole with a public works focus, or committee of the whole with public safety focus? You know what I mean? So I guess ultimately I'm open to ideas. I don't feel like I have the experience on council or the understanding of how we could make it work. But I think there's some beneficial nuggets in there of getting other leaders up and talking about, getting closer with staff, working along the way. So,
But speaking as a former council member, I see great value in having committees for getting council members leading groups and having a diversity of leadership. So that's, we think it's not going to be different between committee of the whole or having a public works committee. It certainly would be somewhat different, because the public works committee chair would be.
someone else would be, yeah.
Yeah, and it draws from the mayor's control, but speaking, for somebody who wants more diversity of thought and to encourage a lot of different ideas, I would be in favor of it. So same amount of meeting time, but if you did it where it's just say like notionally a departmental based committee structure, you would end up with potentially a whole different type of conversation with those people in it.
And then go ahead, Gil.
So historically, like right now, we're here with 6 to 7. Would these committees meet then 6 to 7, just 3 different meetings, and then go right to city council when you say it's the same time, or is it?
Well, I think it depends on the number of people. If it was all 7 council members, it would basically just replace committee of the whole. It'd be like a mini committee.
Right,
of the whole.
right. So it'd be this time frame.
Yeah, that's what I would see it as. It would have to be this time frame, otherwise we would then we have to find a whole nother time when everybody can get together and stuff. That poses another problem. But to Daryl's point as well earlier about having people speak we're having all these work sessions, right? At a committee meeting, people could speak, and we could essentially replace the work session in a way with committee meetings based off referring items to committee rather than referring them to work session. So if we do it efficiently, you could still reserve a work session for special items, but I feel like it could replace the work session, and then you could get your public input.
And you just stick with the same three. For starters, you could start with the same three that's already on the book. The mayor appoints the chair for those committees. They meet at the same time. They always have. They met on Monday nights before the prior council meeting. You'd only meet if you had something on the agenda. For example, you wouldn't have a Public Works Committee unless you had an issue that had been referred to Public Works. So, and then I suppose if that chair is unavailable, that's when either they would ask someone else to run it or the mayor could run it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, not just for referral, but if there are topics that I think of like the I&I session that we had, it wouldn't necessarily have to be referred down. We could just decide ahead of time, okay, this sort of topic is handled by these committees going up before, because they're going to appear in committee of the whole, even though we haven't referred down. So I think we could come up with a list based on the last 2 years or so of topics and sort of divvy out if we wanted to go that approach so that the committees know what their topics are going to be. I heard that was an issue in the past, was kind of fighting over who gets what really juicy topics to deal with.
Well,
I
it might be
wouldn't wanna see us do
more,
that.
for instance, you had Public Works and you had Community Relations. So say it was something about closing streets for Sturgis. The question is that Public Works because it's the streets, or is that Community Relations because it's the parade? And trying to decide which of those is the correct one.
Could be both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Curious, it's saying here prior to 1986 there were 7 standing committees. Was certain committees combined to end up with the 3? Anybody got a good answer to that?
Who was here in '86? Got the institutional memory.
Pick on somebody.
I lived here in '86. What there was is they had the 7 different committees only had 3 on there, so they could meet anytime, anywhere. That's what that was the reasoning for that, because then you didn't have a quorum and you didn't have to put it out publicly, and it didn't have to wait 24 hours. So then you had those 7 committees with 3 on each, and then each person was the chair of one of those committees. So then you would refer to the committee, and then they would deal with that department head of whatever that was. But now, since I've gone to a city manager, the city manager meets with all those department heads, and he does the job of all those committees. So it just cut the council out of it. So efficiency isn't why I'm here. I'm here to help the city any way I can. So that's the way that was. And that was what Stan and I were working on 2 years ago when he passed away. So that was Stan Smith. So we talked a lot about committees and how they worked and all those different things, but he can't help me now. So anyway, I loved Stan and we had a lot of good talks, but that's what it was about the committees. And then they shortened them up. Then they had the 3 with 5. And then from there they just did away, and Susan was on the council at that time. And so they just said, okay, we're not going to have those anymore at all. And then they just went to the committee of the whole, but there was never actually a council vote on that. I didn't even bring my notes from Stan and all that stuff. I just figured I'd let you guys decide which one to do. That's all.
Dave, back then, was budget part of the committees?
Yes. Yes, there was 7 different ones. It actually went back a little bit further into the 60s, and then they shortened up and knocked a couple of them off and combined them because the 7 was too many. But that's in my notes I didn't bring.
Yeah.
I mean,
I have a major
Go ahead.
problem with 3.
well, I don't think you can do 3, unfortunately, or fortunately, or however you look at it. If you do 3, you're going to just get, there will be public outcry.
You just asked about history. That's all I.
No, I know. I'm just saying, in general, 3 would pose a big transparency problem. So I wouldn't be for that at all. But you could go to 7 in the long run. We don't have to start there, obviously, because that's a big chew. But getting to 7 with, or at least having one for each department in the city would be, possibly beneficial. I do like the idea of different council members getting up and leading and also referring things to committee and getting public input, maybe replacing the work session with the committee has more of a focused agenda. We could still bounce ideas. So I think there's a lot of merit there.
Here's a little idea, and maybe this is kind of what we're talking about, and if it's not, I guess it's just an idea. So establishing a committee-like structure to promote education about city operations and to provide appropriate oversight to city functions, include all council members in each committee, administration, public works, public safety, and economic development. The mayor could appoint a council member as committee chair, offering council members leadership and learning opportunities. I think that's what we're talking about. And then each council Monday, we could hold the committee meeting prior to the council meeting. There's 6 council meetings per quarter. Rotate the departments through each Monday, once a quarter, leaving the remaining 2 Mondays for topics not covered in the traditional committee of the whole. You can ask for progress reports each quarter from staff, not status reports, but progress as to where we are with goals that have been laid out from council's strategic planning direction. So that's just a thought.
So that came from a resident, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Would you still have the possibility of committee of the whole with the other standing committees? Probably.
Yeah, they did before.
Because you could, if there was an item that fell, if we started with the 3, like Susan said, and an item was kind of ambiguous on where it would fall, you could refer it to committee of the whole. And
Which would simply mean that the mayor would run it instead of, for instance, if the Public Works one. Like if Dave Cyrus, just for example, was Public Works chair, he would run it. But if it went to committee of the whole, then Mr. Green would run it.
that's
So
fine.
would we still have committee as a whole meetings, each scheduled meeting time too, along with the committee meetings? Or are you saying, okay, we have to hold a special committee?
I'm
committee
assuming
as a
that's
whole?
where.
It depends on the agenda item.
Yeah.
You might say the subcommittees then coagulate together and all 7 get to hear and then make the final decision to give staff direction.
Well, I thought we were talking about all 7 being on the standing committees.
Correct.
And and using that to make
We
decisions.
had 3, 5, or 7. I guess we didn't really decide.
We didn't decide it. I for some reason I thought we were talking about having 7 so that it was more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, just for starters, start out with the 3 that we have, start out with the 7 members. If you later decide you want more committees, you can always add them later. If you decide you don't like it, we haven't changed anything in the ordinance, so go back to the way it is right now.
Yeah, so for what you're saying, that only would require a change in admin policy 7 to say where it says, except for matters dictated by the Code of Ordinances, it's the desire and intent of the council that all matters which are referred or which are to be referred to a committee of the council shall be referred to the council's committee of the whole. So we would just strike that out of Rule 70 and then note where it says standing committee shall be administration committee of the whole, strike that as well, and then that gets us back to the original ordinance. Just for the sake of cleanliness, I would love to have those committees match the names of the departments, but
I agree.
we know admin committee is going to handle FBO type stuff, if that's the case, and then Public Works, of course, handles Public Works. Anything public safety then would by default go to committee of the whole.
That always went to administration because they're required under the union contracts to hold the grievances.
Okay,
Correct?
and that's a
Correct.
good question. I asked Kevin about that this morning for the admin committee and what the rules are for it to hear grievance hearings. And like, you just say a little bit about what you mentioned to me this morning about other cities and how it's all handled.
So the topic we discussed was the administration committee hearing employee grievances on the personnel policies. And actually, that's the only, since I've been here, it's the only time we've convened as an administration committee is for grievances. Of course, council could decide jurisdiction along whatever ways it wishes to do that. But what I was talking to the mayor about this morning is that elected officials hearing employee grievances is unheard of except for in Cedar Falls, especially council. Just I checked, I think 13 or 14 of the biggest cities in Iowa, and this has been a year or so ago, but none of them do that. And so that's something that we've placed in the administration committee that no other city does. So what I'm saying is, if the administration committee didn't handle that, it'd free it up to do these other types of topics. And I don't know how it came about that.
Is there a board or a commission that other cities tended to use to hear grievances, or was it a third party, or what did most people do?
So a grievance, capital G, is covered by collective bargaining agreements. So you've got the union there. Civil service, there's a civil service commission that handles those. And then for an employee that doesn't fall under either one of those, generally that's staff, up to the city administrator that handles those in other cities.
Is there a method for a check and balance for an employee to, appeal to a board to a board that's not beholden? It just seems like if you're an employee and your big boss is holding your grievance, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there.
I'm not seeing the conflict of interest, but I can say that every employee would have a remedy outside the city if the employee wasn't satisfied with the outcome by the city. Just like they could go to Civil Service Commission or PERB for a grievance, or the courts otherwise, Civil Rights Commission, for instance. So there's always a remedy there.
There's always, okay, that's basically what I meant. Is there an avenue for them outside of staff? Not that hopefully we can't look at it inside staff, but and remedy it and make everybody happy. But
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's just, I think it's the council decision to make is, where does the buck stop? Does council want to get involved in those the minutia of personnel matters? And it has decided to. As several of you have been involved in those, we've been involved in administration committee that way.
Okay. Well, and to save us a little bit of time and discussion on that, would there be a consensus to keep the grievances to continue to be heard by the administration committee?
I mean, I feel like we might as well keep it for now. I mean, it's worth having a conversation about, but until we had an exact avenue of how we would really want to do it, I don't feel comfortable making the decision, just changing it.
What do you do if a grievance revolves around Public Works? Wouldn't Public Works be the best suited to handle a grievance for Public Works?
Good question.
I always thought it was in the union contract.
Well, if it's,
It
I don't
is.
know, is
It is,
everything
that's what I
covered by
thought.
union? I mean,
It is. Remember, so there'd be union employees covered by collective bargaining agreements. There's them and civil service employees, but then there's the few that wouldn't be covered by either one of those.
So that's just a consideration. If there was a council desire to eliminate the standing committees as they are and just have committee of the whole, that's something we would then have to find where
Yeah.
that lands. But if that's not going to be an issue for tonight, maybe we just put a pin in it and just know that it's there if there's a question. Other thoughts on direction? I'm hearing kind of a sense for 5 or 7, not really.
What did you say about the admin policy 7? You were going to just strike something and then go off the ordinance?
So if we,
Or you could just
Council
add to
decided.
the end of it, you could just add or, where it said goes to committee of the whole, you could add the words or the standing committee, Public Works.
I was going to say it'd be better to add it to admin policy 7 because committee of the whole is still an option then.
Right.
But in the city ordinance, we don't have committee of the whole as an option. It's just the 3 committees, right? Kevin?
That's right. Committee of the whole is not listed in the ordinances. There's all the other 3.
So we would have to amend admin policy 7 to add those 3 in the ordinance.
Probably that means we should add it into the ordinance too for committee of the whole, right?
We probably should, but maybe we should try this and then change the ordinance. But that's what happened originally, right, Susan? And then the ordinance never got changed, so maybe we should just go ahead and change the ordinance.
If, either way, so status quo is we are using committee of the whole. If we continue with that, personally, I'd feel a lot better if we had the ordinance reflect our practice.
I understand, I agree. I'll be okay with adding it to the ordinance and then also changing admin policies 7.
Okay, so we've got probably another 15, 20 minutes we can have open for discussion. Are there any other aspects of committees that you're concerned about or that you would like to see different or approach different?
Well, I go back, Mr. Mayor, to what the 7 used to be, and not knowing that necessarily, trying to decide if 3 is fine, or you had an example of 4, and so that's, making a decision without all the facts is not my style.
Mm-hmm. But it was 3, rather it wasn't 4, at least in mine. I don't have a diagram of.
Well, I'm saying there was 7, and what were the 7? One was budget.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. 4 committees. I thought you meant 4 committee members, but yeah, four separate committees.
Yeah, there was 7, but then there was 3 on 7 of them, on each of 7. If we have the 3, and if we decide to have 5, or all 7 of us, I mean, from my understanding, all 7 counselors would come in typically and listen, to these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So, but not say anything.
Yeah,
So they're not entitled to say,
Yeah, and I kind of compare that to the like the state legislature where they have subcommittees, but then you're not having all the other legislators in that subcommittee meeting listening and trying to.
True. That's actually a
very
really good analogy that you just brought up, Mr. Mayor, that at the state legislature you have your subcommittees of 3 and sometimes 5, I think. I think it's usually 3, though. And they make a preliminary decision if it's worthy of going forward. That's exactly what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, the one concern though with that then is if something was brought down to a committee by referral and that committee decided, well, we don't want to have that brought further forward, then it would effectively die. And so
Well,
wouldn't want to risk that.
if there's not enough merit to have it move forward, or some decision was made on policy that, I don't know, didn't require council's input, possibly? I don't know.
I'm just thinking in terms, say you had hypothetically 3 people on a works or a standing committee who all thought that this thing shouldn't happen, but then you've got 4 people on council
Or
who are part of
others.
it, who want it to happen and they can't get it.
Could you still directly refer to committee of the whole?
Well,
to trump that denial?
you could just tell the city clerk as 4 members to put it on the agenda, and it
There's
would
also-
be put on the agenda. So,
That's true for an override.
Referral.
yeah.
Actually, I think you have that power anyway as mayor.
Well, or the mayor could put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
There are multiple ways around it dying. It's just the other council members would then have to be paying close attention to what's happening in each of the committees to see then and talk to each other to put it on. It becomes,
messy.
it gets,
Well, you
Slightly
have that
convoluted.
process right now. You get in your mind enough people to move it forward. In Des Moines, if something dies in a subcommittee or a committee, it can be amended on another item. So there's ways to keep things alive.
I would,
And I was-
excuse me, I'd just add, if it makes any difference to council, and council can always change this, right now, the ordinance and admin policy 7 both state that standing committees shall consist of 7 members.
That's why I was suggesting it was the easiest way to keep it like the ordinance says, is just we're actually going the next step where the mayor's appointing a chair and they're actually running the meetings. And then it's opening it up also then for public input because they're not work sessions.
I think
I like that.
starting it that way is the path of least resistance, and then seeing if it works, and then we can change it if we feel like we need to. The only thing to throw out would be if you wanted more committees, the only thing that makes sense to me is 1 committee per department. So whatever departments we have, Public Works, Public Safety, you wouldn't have a human resources one. You would have the finance department.
I'm still curious what the 7 is. Jennifer, maybe you're the longest.
I was in high school at that time, so I can't answer that one, but no.
Okay.
And I think what you have to be careful about is that there might have been, and it worked at some point, about 7 and having only 3. I think what you have to keep in mind is state law and state interpretation of walking quorums have changed since the 80s. So the thought of you can go back to having 2 or 3 is just more difficult under state law than it used to be. So I think that's what you have to keep in mind about that. I think nobody here is going to have that history about what happened in the 80s, unfortunately.
Community development, finance, public safety, public works. Are there other ones, big ones I'm missing?
Well, there'd be 5, right? There'd be 5?
4.
There's 4 departments.
Or, so you could have the 4 departments. I don't know. That trying to streamline it to make as much sense with city business as possible, and giving other council members chances to lead, and still keeping it on Monday nights.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
'cause
I think if you did that, if you took that approach, it would be like the path of least resistance, or sort of dipping our toe into this. By not having any changes to the numbers, then everyone still attends, and I think that helps with Kelly's efficiency point. Like, it wouldn't add additional work to staff, it would just be a different structure handling it. And to Simon's point about the Public Safety Committee, I know that's probably the most potentially contentious one, but if it still is all council members, we're not going to
Still all
risk an
7.
agenda.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are the thoughts on that, maybe for moving forward to try that?
So you're saying we'd go to 4? 4
Right, so
committees?
what we have currently plus.
To match the city function, yeah.
And I would think there wouldn't be a lot that then gets handled by committee of the whole. It'd be,
You could leave it just in case.
yeah.
Put it on the books.
The discussion at these committees, is it going to be a consensus vote? Or is it just going to be a discussion with no vote?
With a committee, it'd be a vote.
You could make with a committee, we would have public input, and you could make a motion and make
okay.
a vote.
But the item still moves on to the actual
council.
agenda to council.
Yeah.
Yeah, so council would be the final approver on it.
It'd go to council and not committee of the whole then?
Yeah, I
Correct.
bet you think of it real similar to Planning and Zoning Commission. Because they don't make final decisions, but their decision does weigh in heavily.
So it'd be us 7 at the same time with a rotating agenda to have one of those 4 be the topic discussion, and then whoever's the committee chair for that would lead
run the
that
meeting.
discussion.
Correct.
And it should take up the same footprint as our current committee meetings, because just think for committee of the whole, we might hear something that's related to public works and something else that's related to budget. And then so all we would do is we would just break out those into 2 separate meetings. One happens right after the other.
Correct.
And transparency, it would be televised, and to
Just
your
like that.
point, it'd be open to public
Public
discussion,
input.
Public input.
We could refer stuff to the committees rather than work session, then people would be able to have input.
So do away with work sessions unless
Really needed, or
Like
some
the
informal
big ones that
topic.
we used
Yeah.
to have. Okay.
And the mayor would still attend each of those.
Yeah,
It wants to.
yeah.
I would think he would.
I think it'd be important to
He's gonna
know
be
what the
gone.
discussion. But something else I love about this, and it kind of comes from Robert's rules too, is when it talks about committee of the whole, it says that the committee of the whole is led by the vice president of the council, which by state law is the mayor pro tem. And as much as there'd be, there should be a desire from the mayor to want to maintain control, I actually like the idea of having the mayor pro tem as the chair of committee of the whole, so that it gives a different idea, a different perspective. And then I'm sort of reserved fresh for when it comes to the final council discussion. I'm not rehashing the same discussions. I'm sort of hearing it new or participating new. And I wouldn't plan to participate at all on the committee meetings. I would just be an observer. And so that's the only change I would recommend from what we're talking about, is that committee of the whole idea of having the mayor pro tem lead that. because the mayor pro tem won't be one of the committee chairs.
Right.
So back when the discussion that Dave Sires was saying, would we change the agendas for those committee meetings? I mean, would there be budget and those sort of things, or,
Well, the budget would fall under the finance.
but it wouldn't be under each individual department?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question for Kevin. If we head this route, we still have the ordinance which states that the administrative committee hears grievances. Would we still need to have that committee as a side, as like just like a committee that only hears grievances, unless we decided to talk about another way in the future to handle those?
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's in the ordinance, but it's in the.
It's in the union contract. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah. So, but council can decide jurisdictionally what matters goes to each standing committee.
I think what he's saying, if it goes by departments, which is finance and business operation, is that the same as administration? I think what Simon.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Do we need to have an administration committee by name
So-
to make union contract happy?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the short answer is yes, but again, the ordinance doesn't specify what matters exactly go to each standing committee. So somebody's got to make that decision to start with. I would add for transition's sake that I think mayor, even though those weren't functioning standing committees per ordinance, I think you've appointed chairs each year, so they're in place right now, which would
Yeah,
aid.
the only one that's not in place is there's no existence of a public safety committee, so I would just need to appoint that.
Except I think Kelly's listed as a chair for all of them, which I don't know that she, no, isn't she? I don't think she'd want to do them all.
You're admin, but
I'm an admin.
And then Gil's Public Works, if I remember right. And Community Relations and Planning, I think is Dustin.
I'm open to try it.
Yeah, I agree.
I
I think,
There's,
Cool.
there's actually no change because since all 7 of us are on, there's no subcommittees. It's just the same stuff. Unless you have subcommittees and you have smaller amounts of people in those so they can dig into all the different departments, there's no change.
Yeah.
So there's no need to call one a committee of this or a committee of that because it's all still the committee of the whole. It's just a work session.
No,
There's no change right now because it's all 7 of us.
but there'll be a different chair for each. And
yeah, you get the other people chairing it, and then I mean I can see the side that it is just one way to do committee of the whole, a bunch of different ways. But how do you get to you can't get to 3, you can't do it.
That's how the city was run back in the 60s. It was just purely business people, and that's how they did it. They just had their 3, and they had that so they didn't have a quorum. And then other people from the council could sit in on those meetings, but not talk. So they got a lot more information, but we don't need that now because we have a city manager, and he does that all for us. But it would be great to have that kind of in-depth study into each group, but it takes a smaller amount of people.
The
That's all.
advantage of this is simply that there's one, a chair, and 2 public input.
Yeah, I like the idea of the public input. I'd note too, that we're at a community of about 41,000 people now, and we were about 19 and 20 back then, so it is a different apples to oranges type of discussion on what our business, how we were occupied with what topics we had,
And our staff is different.
and our staff is different also, yeah.
Yeah, the big danger with 3 though is you can meet, I mean, the Dave side I see it's like you can meet easier, but that's just not going to fly in today's society. Not going to be able to meet at a coffee shop and do a deal, and that's just bad. It's going to cause a lot of trouble, unfortunately.
that was,
Oh, no, I didn't come here to fight. I came.
No,
here
I know.
I just had the information, the history from '86. I had it from Stan Smith, who was coaching me how to get our committees back. That's all. It's like I said, I didn't even bring my notes in. I knew it was going to be a very modest whatever you decided, it wasn't going to go back to the extreme that I would look for in a true government. That's all. I'm not upset or anything
I would
else.
take issue with that, to say it's not real government.
Well, it's not the same government. It's a different style of government. Instead of truly us being in charge and looking into every single thing, now we've more put it over to staff to handle that stuff. That's all. That's kind of the difference.
Well, you kind of threw it out as very informal and very friendly, but I mean, it's a big statement to say that the county.
Well, that's what it is. That's what I believe. That's what I see. I'm not going to back down from it. I'm just saying it's different than it was then. That's all. It's a different style. That's all.
So looking at how it could be for, like, as we're talking about here, it sounds like we have a good consensus for bringing back or allowing the committees to, the standing committees to exist with 7 members. Then if down the road, once we have this, like, see how this works, if it's a good approach, I think that certainly is a good next discussion, is if we want to enable subcommittees as well of smaller. But I just don't think that we're there yet.
So, Mr.
Start
Mayor,
with this, and you can always go to subcommittees. I'm sorry.
go ahead. Start with this, yeah. I'm assuming there's publication requirements for these so that the public knows, what, by Wednesday before the Monday meeting then?
So it's
Like the packet?
Yeah.
it's a meeting of council, so same rules apply for agenda, notice,
24 hours.
minimum.
But it would be coming out in the packet.
Yeah, the logistics of the packet.
So what we
I'm not
used to
sure
do when there was each of the committees, they would just be at the front of the packet, and it would be kind of the order that they were going to be. So if, Susan probably remembers that too, if like Public Works was going to be at 5:30 and admin at 6:30 or whatever, the packet for the Public Works would be first, then the packet for the admin, and then the full council packet. It was just still part of that whole packet that you got. And I assume what we would do now is we would have to just set up those separately on the website and have Public Works Committee and admin committee or whatever it is, and then those packets would just be on that, kind of how we do right now with Committee of the Whole and
work
council.
session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully I have a few minutes to talk about this, but my last big question on it would be the agendas and who would set or approve the agendas. In the old, like, the way it was before, was that, do you remember if the agendas were set by the committee chair or set by the mayor? Or do we have that from staff, the information?
Or is there a legal requirement?
There isn't, but I think admin policy 7 says for all meetings, the mayor sets the agenda.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it was done by what was referred generally at
Right.
the last council meeting.
Right.
Okay. So would council have any concerns about me keeping that authority?
Not right now.
Yeah, with the understanding that I would want to honor the role of that chair, and I wouldn't want to step in unnecessarily.
I think leaving it that way for now is fine. If
Okay.
we
But
need
happy
to change it
discuss that later.
later, yeah, we could.
Okay. Well, I think that gives us enough information, and I guess the question then is, when would we want to start this? Should we seek to start it for the new fiscal year, so after July 1st, and then try it for 6 months and see how it goes?
Sounds good,
Yep.
And we'll set up
That or why not sooner, I guess, I don't know.
because it's going to take them a while to.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah, give it a little time.
gonna get geared up, change admin policy 7, change the ordinances 2 to reflect the change. So yeah, we're talking 3 readings right there, so probably July 1st. For Ron, do you think that might be a doable timeframe? Do you have concerns about that, for July 1st as the start date for new committee structure?
So we're having just a little sidebar over here trying to figure out exactly what that means. So if we were to go, if the council still kept the 3 committees and a committee of the whole and just not assigned anything to committee of the whole, you can almost start that immediately because it wouldn't require any ordinance changes. But if we're going to actually go to 4 committees, then we would require some ordinance changes and an additional appointment for a chairman of that committee. So
Yeah.
that would take, obviously, the drafting of the ordinance and the 3 readings and such.
Okay.
My recommendation is to go with the 3 that we have on the books.
So 3 on the books, and then for anything that's public safety, just do that through committee of the whole?
Well, public safety would be I would call it administration.
Well, it's its own department, though. I'd want to keep it clean like that.
That's fine. We can start there and with the 3 that are on the books, and then keep committee of the whole. And
Keep committee of the whole.
maybe,
Yeah, so I'll ask for council just for thought on the public safety. Would you rather have that on committee of the whole or sent over to admin?
doesn't matter to me.
We care?
All 7 of us will be here.
All right. Well, we have the discussions for Director of Public Safety, that position coming up. So I don't know if that would be heard, if anything would come up through one of the 2 groups. Normally, you wouldn't have much for a Public Safety Committee. So
I
maybe
would
guess I would-
recommend the administration, just because that's the way it was. It worked well that way before,
Okay.
so
Okay.
why do we need to change it?
Sure.
It did work well that way.
all right. So fold that into admin until we decide we want to change the ordinance to have a Public Safety.
Well, and I think the good thing too, just like Simon said, is if all 7 are still staying on the committees for now anyway, at least you're hearing that. You may want to decide to change that if you go to only 5 on a committee or something. So at least it would be a good starting point, like you
Okay.
said.
So with Susan's idea, that sounds, if the council doesn't object, we'll go with that. All right. So anything else to go to the order for committees to talk about tonight?
Mayor, just one last clarifying. So with the committee of the whole, does that now mean, just so everybody's on the same page, does that now mean that Mayor Pro Tem will be running that meeting?
Yep.
Yeah, that's my understanding. With me eagerly interested from the sidelines. Okay. Great. So with that, I think we can close out this work session, which also that ties into the idea of work sessions in the future. Like it sounds like we might want to minimize those, reserve those to very specific topics once in a while, and have most everything set through committee of the whole so that we can have public input.
Kind of like the UNI, the last meeting we did with UNI, that's a good work session that we could still hear public input on. I don't know, that'd be my idea.
Okay. Great. So with that, I'll consider this work session closed, and we've got about 5 minutes until 7, and so we'll deconvene for a bit and come back and have our regular meeting. So we're adjourned until 7 o'clock.